On a summer day in 1974, a young girl walking through the dunes of Cape Cod found something so disturbing it would haunt Massachusetts for nearly 50 years, until DNA finally gave her back her name and exposed the shocking truth about the man authorities believe committed this horrific crime. Her name was Ruth Marie Terry, but for decades, the world knew her only as the Lady of the Dunes. And this is her story. Welcome back to Echoes and Oddities. My name is Ivy Monroe, and this is one of my shorter episodes from the Bizarre Lunchtime Tales series. This is the quicker, bite-sized side of the channel, and these stories tend to be more strange or unsettling. All of these are true stories you can listen to on your lunch break, while you're driving, cleaning up, taking a walk, or just stepping away from the noise of the day. These episodes are more of a traditional podcast style than my deeper visual episodes, so you do not have to watch the screen. You can just listen. But for this story, I was able to find a few real photos connected to the case, and I'll share those near the end for anyone watching on YouTube. Now let's go back to Cape Cod in the summer of 1974. It was July 26, 1974, in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Provincetown sits at the very tip of Cape Cod, a place known for beaches, artists, summer visitors, and long stretches of sand dunes that can feel peaceful in the daytime and lonely once the crowds disappear. That day, a young girl was walking through the Race Point Dunes with her family dog. What should have been an ordinary summer walk turned into the beginning of one of the most haunting cold cases in New England history. In the sand, about a mile from the road, she found the body of a woman. The woman was lying on a beach blanket. She had no identification with her, no purse, no obvious way for investigators to immediately know who she was, and from the beginning, it was clear this was not a natural death. Investigators believed she had been killed weeks before she was found. She had suffered severe injuries, including blunt force trauma to the head. Her hands had also been removed, which investigators believed may have been done to stop police from identifying her through fingerprints. That detail made the case even more disturbing, because whoever killed her did not just want her dead, it looked like they wanted her erased. Police began trying to figure out who this woman was. They estimated she was in her 30s. She had auburn or reddish-brown hair. She had dental work that suggested she may have had access to decent dental care at some point in her life. But there was no missing person report that clearly matched her. No one came forward and said, "That's my sister." No one said, "That's my wife." No one said, "That's my mother." And so, without a name, she became known as the Lady of the Dunes. For years, investigators tried everything they could with the tools they had at the time. Her remains were examined. Her face was reconstructed. Sketches and images were released to the public. Her case was featured in newspapers, on television, and later across the internet as true crime communities began trying to solve older mysteries. But the same question stayed at the center of it all. Who was she? And who had done this to her? As the years passed, theories began to grow around the case. Some people wondered if she had been a traveler or drifter who ended up in Provincetown during the busy summer season. Others wondered if she had crossed paths with a serial killer. There were even theories connecting her death to organized crime, or to someone who had wanted to make sure she could never be identified. And then there was the famous Jaws theory. The movie Jaws was filmed around Martha's Vineyard, not far from Cape Cod, and it was released in 1975, the year after the Lady of the Dunes was found. Years later, some people noticed a woman in the background of a scene from the movie. She wore jeans and a blue bandana, and some believed she looked similar to the reconstructions of the unidentified woman. The idea took off online. What if the Lady of the Dunes had appeared as an extra in Jaws? It was an eerie thought. A woman possibly captured on film, alive and moving through the background of a famous movie, only to be found murdered not long after. But as fascinating as that theory was, it was never confirmed. It became one of those strange pieces of internet lore that kept the case alive, but it did not solve it. The real answer would not come from a movie. It would come from DNA. For decades, the Lady of the Dunes remained unidentified. Her body was exhumed more than once as technology improved. Investigators kept going back to the case, hoping that new science could finally do what traditional police work had not been able to do. And then, in 2022, everything changed. Using investigative genetic genealogy, authorities were finally able to identify her. The Lady of the Dunes was Ruth Marie Terry. She was born in Tennessee in 1936. She was 37 years old when she died. She had lived in different places, including Tennessee, California, Massachusetts, and she also had ties to Michigan. And suddenly, after almost 50 years, this was no longer just the story of an unidentified woman found in the dunes. It was the story of Ruth, a real woman, a daughter, a sister, a mother. Someone who had laughed, traveled, loved, made choices, had family, had a past, and deserved a future. That is one thing I always think about with unidentified victim cases. For years, the mystery can become so big that the person at the center almost disappears behind it. People focus on the location, the theories, the clues, and the creepy details. But when a name is restored, the whole story shifts. Because Lady of the Dunes sounds like a legend. Ruth Marie Terry sounds like a person. And that matters. Once Ruth had her name back, investigators could begin looking more closely at her life and at the people connected to her. That is when attention turned to her husband, Guy Rockwell Moldavin. Ruth had married Guy Moldavin in 1974, the same year she was killed. Authorities later said that after their marriage, the couple traveled to visit Ruth's family in Tennessee. But according to investigators, when Guy returned from that trip, Ruth was not with him. He was reportedly driving what was believed to be Ruth's vehicle, and he allegedly told people that Ruth had died. But Ruth's family never saw her again. That detail is chilling because now, looking back, the timeline starts to feel very different. For years, investigators had a woman with no name. Once they knew she was Ruth, they could trace her last known connections. And there he was, her husband. Guy Moldavin was not some random stranger passing through Cape Cod. He was the man who had married Ruth just months before her body was discovered. And his past was disturbing. Years earlier, he had also been connected to another dark chapter in Washington state, where another wife and stepdaughter disappeared and were later found dead. He had been considered a suspect in that case, though he was not convicted. So when investigators looked at Ruth's murder, Guy Moldavin became impossible to ignore. By the time authorities identified him as the person responsible for Ruth's death, he was already dead. He died in 2002. That means there would be no trial, no courtroom moment, no sentence, no chance for Ruth's family to look him in the eye and hear the truth spoken under oath. In August 2023, authorities officially announced that the Lady of the Dunes case was closed. They concluded that Ruth Marie Terry had been killed by her husband, Guy Moldavin. After nearly 50 years, the mystery finally had an answer. But it was not the kind of answer that feels clean or satisfying. Because yes, Ruth got her name back. Yes, investigators identified the person they believe killed her. But Guy Moldavin was gone. And because he was gone, he never had to face justice in life. That is one of the hardest parts of cold cases. Sometimes the truth comes too late for a trial, too late for a confession, too late for the person responsible to be held accountable in the way we want. But the truth still matters. It matters because Ruth was not forgotten. It matters because her family finally knew what happened. It matters because the public record no longer says only unidentified woman. It says Ruth Marie Terry. And it says the man authorities believe killed her was her husband. When you think about where she was found, it is easy to understand why this case haunted people for so long. The dunes of Provincetown are beautiful, and you don't think of a place like that being the scene of a crime. This is a quiet and open place, with wind blowing over the sand and beach grass bending toward the ocean. So it's just really hard to imagine such a horrific scene. It is the kind of place people visit for peace, vacation, or to escape the busyness of life. But in July of 1974, those dunes became the final place Ruth was left. For decades, people walked those beaches and drove those roads while her identity remained unknown, and her case became part of local memory because she was a woman with no name. Her face was reconstructed again and again, and for decades nobody knew who she was. And it appeared her case would never be solved. It's really great that science caught up so that we had a name with her face. The good thing is that with advancements in technology, we are able to identify victims and solve decades-old cases that would have otherwise stayed cold. As I sit and research these cases, I am so glad that we have things like investigative genealogy because we changed the trajectory of so many cold cases. It has given names back to unidentified victims. It has pointed investigators toward suspects no one could have found in the 1970s, 80s, or 90s. And in Ruth's case, it finally helped close one of Massachusetts' oldest unidentified homicide cases. Now, for those watching on YouTube, I want to share a few real images connected to this case. Because while this episode is made to be listened to like a podcast, I do think seeing Ruth's face matters. For so long, the public saw reconstructions and sketches. But now, we can see Ruth as Ruth. Not just as the Lady of the Dunes, not just as a mystery, but as a woman whose life was taken, whose name was lost for almost 50 years, and whose story finally reached the surface. And that is where this case leaves us, with a woman found in the sand in 1974, a name restored in 2022, a husband named as her killer in 2023, and a reminder that sometimes the past is not as silent as it seems. Sometimes it is just waiting for the right piece of evidence to speak. Ruth Marie Terry was known to the world for decades as the Lady of the Dunes. But that was never who she truly was. She was Ruth. And now, finally, the world knows her name. Thank you for listening to this episode of Bizarre Lunchtime Tales. If you want more strange, true stories that are short enough for a lunch break, but still detailed enough to pull you in, make sure you check out the Bizarre Lunchtime Tales playlist. And I want to know what you think. Do you believe cases like this prove that more old mysteries can still be solved with DNA? Or do you think some answers will always stay buried? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.